Hello, welcome. This is Newsroom, coming to you live from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Ivan Jansen. The show, of course, always live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we are live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on demand all day on our YouTube channel. Now, today we look ahead to the debate in the National Assembly on the ADA Committee's report on Nkandla there later. South Africa's service delivery problems are due to a culture of non-payment for services, says some. Then Oscar Pistorius will be released from prison this week. We asked the question, what do you think of Oscar Pistorius being released in Women's Month? There's the question at SABC Newsroom. That's where you can send us your contribution. We'll put it up a little bit later. We also look at gun control and gun laws within the context. And we conclude today with a look at the gender wage gap here in South Africa that, believe it or not, is amongst the highest in the world. But first, let's get the day's news from Nkandla.
Good morning, I'm Nkandla. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Police have fired rubber bullets outside the Rehabilitation primary school west of Johannesburg this morning. Violence erupted when mostly coloured parents prevented a school bus from ferrying learners from the school to near Pretoria Glen. Police were called to control the situation as parents were trying to force the gates of the school open. The National Assembly will today debate the reports of the ADA Committee on Nkandla. During the debate, the Democratic Alliance in Parliament says it will move a motion on behalf of the opposition to have the committee's report substituted with the minority's report. The ADA Committee has supported Police Minister Nathi Nhlekwa's report, which exonerated President Jacob Zuma from any liability in the Nkandla security upgrades. In KwaZulu-Natal, the cause of an accident which left around 14 people dead in Shaka's Head near Belito is being investigated. The province's Department of Transport and police have launched a probe into the collision. Reports say a minibus taxi veered off the road and plunged into the railway line, where it was hit by an oncoming train.
The department is doing something in terms of looking exactly what is it that can be done here to prevent a future accident like this one. But this one is a very bad one. It's a very, very bad one.
President Jacob Zuma has handed over the chairmanship of the SADC Organ for Peace, Politics, Defence and Security to Mozambique's head of state, Filipe Nyusi. The handover took place in Gaborone in Botswana, where the annual SADC summit is taking place. Just a day before Reva Steenkamp would have celebrated her 32nd birthday, her parents say they are still coming to terms with her death. Yesterday, the parents of the model, whom Oscar Pistorius killed, released a statement through their lawyers. Meanwhile, the state in the Oscar Pistorius case is ready to appeal the athlete's murder acquittal. It submitted heads of argument in the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein to have his culpable homicide conviction overturned. Pistorius has served 10 months of his 5-year sentence for killing Steenkamp in 2013. In Thailand, bomb squad experts are filtering through the debris of a blast at a Bangkok religious shrine. At least 21 people were killed and many wounded in the attack on the city. The hunt is meanwhile intensifying for the bombers. Authorities are looking for a suspect seen on CCTV footage near the scene of the bombing. And a search team has arrived at the site of a crashed plane in Papua in eastern Indonesia. This comes 2 days after the Taringa Air flight went down with 54 people on board. Attempts are now being made to remove the dead from the remote mountainous site. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you, Anina. The National Assembly will debate the report of the ADA Committee on Nkandla today. The committee report confirms the findings of Police Minister that President Jacob Zuma does not have to pay for non-security upgrades at his private residence. Opposition parties that took part in the ADA committee are opposed to the findings and are likely to take the report to court, they say, once it has gone through the parliamentary processes. The public protector earlier found that President Zuma had unduly benefited from upgrades. Meanwhile, The Institute for the Advancement of the South African Constitution says it is likely to challenge President Jacob Zuma in court over the Nkandla security upgrades. Now, our very own man, Mandalisi Dubasi, joins us from our studio in Parliament in Cape Town. Very good morning to you, Mandalisi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Evan.
Mandalisi, the expectation in the National Assembly today, what do you reckon is going to happen?
Well, Evan, you know, as you rightly said in your introduction, that all indications, the tone and the language that we have been hearing from yesterday is that this will absolutely end up in the court of law. On the one hand, I can't see any compromise. On the one hand, the DA, on behalf of the 9 opposition parties that have been participating in this ad hoc committee, is going to move a motion to replace that ad hoc committee, that Nkandla ad hoc committee, with their own, the one they drafted, and their own basically, it confirms or endorses what the public protector has said, that the president should pay the portion or part of the money that was used for the non-security features in his Nkandla home. Surely the ANC is going to reject that, and it's going to go to a vote, and the ANC has got the majority. And from there, James Self has said to us that they are going to immediately, today or tomorrow morning, give notices to both the Speaker of Parliament and to the President that they will be taking this matter to court. So, by all means, it's going to court.
What's the expectation then in the House today? Another vigorous debate, or as you say, everyone's kind of toning it down, knowing that they'll go to court?
I'm not sure, even if they will tone it down. I mean, they will pull all strings. You will remember that over and above the 9 parties that have been participating in that ad hoc committee, there is also the EFF that has already took the matter to the Constitutional Court, and there is COPE that also rejected it. COPE even rejected those in-local visits to Nkandla, saying that it was a waste of money. And you can't, you know, in that situation, we're not going to expect that anybody will, you know, be calm today in Parliament. And at the end of the day, as I said, it will go straight to court.
Let's quickly talk about this report, which is now known as the minority report of the opposition parties. Have you had line of sight of this report? And then how will this report be put forward to Parliament?
Well, there's one way in which it could be put forward, Eben, is that it should be tabled also in Parliament. They should move a motion to table that report. So it will depend whether the Speaker and the National Assembly accept or reject it. If they accept it, then it would have to be debated, and they will have to look at the nitty-gritties of it. But indications are that the Speaker and the National Assembly are going to reject it. And so it's not going to see the end of the light. And James Self has already said that they are expecting the worst. So it's not going to go there. And it's going to be tabled, but it's not going to be rejected. And as I said, the roads are leading to court.
Well, at least it should be another interesting day in Parliament. I'm sure you guys will keep us updated as to what should be another intense session in the House a little bit later. That's our parliamentary reporter, Mandalisi Dubasi, coming to us live from Cape Town ahead of that debate in Parliament around the ad hoc committee's report on Nkandla. Just our top story quickly. Angry parents at the Rehabilitation primary school have said they are refusing to let their children be taught at a temporary facility because they fear for their safety. Of course, violence broke out there this morning. We've seen varying reports coming in, videos coming in. Here are some of the views on social media. Rective Care says parents are murdering each other at Rehabilitation Primary. This all due to racial beliefs. I thought we've passed that stage. Rector, unfortunately, I think it's taken a lot longer for us to get over that. Nonwabo says, so coloured people want a black principal fired at Rehabilitation Primary School. Where are we? Black on black, he says. Yes, it seems like that. The next one is from Dinchang. Should parents be more inclined to get their children's education elsewhere while they resolve their issue? Hashtag Rehabilitation Primary. Of course, we've seen some of that video coming in this morning. varying degrees of unhappiness from parents about who will be doing the teaching at their schools. Of course, let's just go and take a look at our picture of the day. A shocking story, this one, and it comes from Mr. Nat Turner. And it's captioned, just look at the wreckage of what's left of the taxi. Of course, 15 people were killed in this crash, the taxi train crash in KwaZulu-Natal yesterday. Information is still emerging, but if you look at that picture, it's an absolute shocker, isn't it? Now, we move on. The culture of non-payment significantly affected service delivery in many municipalities around the country, says Operation Patala. The culture of non-payment for services emanates from rent boycotts in the 1980s as a method of resistance against apartheid and black local authorities of that time. Now, power utility Eskom has suffered heavy profit losses as a result of debt owed by several municipalities, loss of industrial customers, and delays in commissioning of power plants. Now, Soweto residents are currently responsible for half of South Africa's electricity debt to the power utility, estimated to be at around 8 billion rand. Eskom is not the only utility company that is owed money. Various water boards are owed a total of around 3.6 billion rand by municipalities as of the 25th of April this year. Now, Nkandla Management Services has launched Operation Patala, an awareness initiative to encourage communities to pay for service delivery in their own towns and municipalities. Now, Nkandla's CEO, Fikile Bile, is with us once again. Very good morning to you, Fikile. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
It's very concerning. We live in the time of service delivery protests, really, but you put forward the argument that this culture of non-payment that stems from a mindset with roots in the 1980s rent boycotts. Just give us your views around it. How do you see that tap into today?
I think the political landscape has changed. Mm-hmm. It has changed thus far that it is time that South Africans should realize that things are no longer like before. During apartheid, we had valid reasons why we should not, why we protested to pay against municipal services then. But now the new government has taken over. The new government has tried all its best to make sure that it improves the lives of our people. But now what are we doing as communities, as business, even government, to ensure that we pay for services? I mean, we've launched Operation Patala in Mafube municipality with Jabulani Sigasa, the mayor, and we also launched it in Mkondo. It was successful because we had to understand the dynamics of why people are not paying for services. And then we came across child-headed home families where we understand why they cannot afford. Yeah. But the culture of not paying municipal services also affects Eskom to be efficient in order to roll out electricity to the townships and business.
Soweto is pointed out as a case in point for Eskom, where half of the country's debt sits in Soweto, where people are not paying. How do we overcome that sort of legacy and the issue that Soweto itself is sitting with today?
I think the people of Soweto must do justice to themselves and to Eskom. They were in the forefront of the struggle. You know, everything or most of the apartheid activities happened in Soweto. June 16th, they happened in your likes of Soweto. The people of Soweto do afford. It's just that the people of Soweto needs to be rehabilitated. You know, I think it's time that politically the politicians should hit the ground running to go and re-educate the people and teach them the importance of paying for services, because our Eskom is indebted because of they are not paying. And if you look at the lifestyle of the people of Soweto, not all of them cannot afford. Most of them can afford. I mean, you saw that clip on TV where I did a campaign in Soweto at one stage. I saw an old lady with an iPad. She was on Instagram, but she can't pay municipal services. You know, they drive beautiful cars. They've got beautiful houses in Soweto. They can't pay municipal services. They can't pay Eskom. It's a culture that we must face away as South Africans. It doesn't need foreigners. It doesn't need everybody. It needs us South Africans. But you know, where do we make mistakes? We leave community, leaders out of this. Yeah. We don't involve the church. We don't involve traditional leaders. You know, there are many people who are not involved. We tend to think that if Fikile can go to Soweto, he can convince the people of Soweto.
Yeah.
But it needs me and the people of Soweto. So I think the most important thing for our municipalities to be able to pay ESCOM, they need to pay service. You know, even I just started, I'm going to do a campaign at the Tsobotla Municipality Northwest. I've loaded their accounts on the system. It gave me 28,000 accounts. That's what they gave me. But when I load their accounts, I get 50,000 IDs. You know where's the loss? South Africans don't know. Municipalities will never be able to recoup all what they are using out there, because we are actually having more people using electricity than we have on the billing system. Eben Johnson, you build a block of flats, you register house number 1, you've got 40 units. You only pay 1 bill. When you rent out to Fikile bill, you say rent to you pay rent with electricity involved. You know that you don't pay for the municipal services.
That's the one element. But I want to take you back to the entitlement scenario that you painted about South Africans, is that we need to communicate, yes, but it seems almost a bridge too far. How do we get past this entitlement scenario that you've painted for us?
Eben, during the apartheid, when we were protesting, my mom was still paying for services. It was a necessity, she had to pay. Now, we have a tendency of going around and register our people wrongly as indigents because we want to stay politically correct. But at the end of the day, we need to go back to basic and say to South Africans, everybody must come forward. For example, when I do data cleansing, I need your proof of income in order for me to inform the municipality that, can you afford? But now, the reality is even, the problem is not only sitting also with municipalities, it also sits with the councillors.
What about these municipalities? Surely there are records that shows individuals, households and the like. How do they take action? Surely the municipalities can't put their hands up and say, oh, people don't want to pay.
I don't think they don't have the systems to verify people. We at Zandile Management Services, we do. They don't have capacity to check if people are registered wrongly. We do. So that's why we found that we approach municipalities and say, how can we assist you in order to see to it that you've got the wrong or the right people in your billing system? They also have a problem with the billing system. The current billing systems with municipalities, they've been there before the new democracy. They still cannot use the current billing systems that are there. So, for example, if I'm employed at a municipality, I must go and help them with the billing system because they can't use it, because they don't have access how to use the billing system. So there are a lot of things that needs to be changed in municipalities. But I strongly believe if municipalities will allow expertise, like Zandile Management Services, to come on board and look at their revenue status to see how we can assist them to make that sure that in the future they don't have many losses like they have now.
It's money that is needed within the fiscus. It's money that is needed to help solve the problems that we face in South Africa. Definitely. Thank you for joining us. Fikile Bile, the Chief Executive Officer of Zandile Management Systems. We're talking about the culture of non-payment for services here in South Africa. What do you think about it? Send us your views at SABC Newsroom. Let's now have a look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. These are newspapers from around the world. In Europe, the Times reports that at least 19 people, including foreign tourists, were killed and scores injured when a bomb exploded in the heart of Bangkok yesterday in one of Thailand's worst ever terrorist attacks. Moving to the United States, the USA Today says, well, it's also leading with that story. Thailand's Prime Minister said yesterday that authorities had seen some suspects in security camera footage of the central Bangkok bombing that killed at least 20 people and injured 140, and promised to track down those responsible for what he described as the country's worst attack in history. Finally, in China, the South China Morning Post reports that Chinese soldiers, including chemical warfare specialists, are racing to clear hazardous materials at the Tianjin blast site ahead of forecast rain, which could generate new clouds of toxic gas there. Let's take a quick look at what's happening around the country in South Africa today. We start in Johannesburg, where, well, the 8 policemen accused of murdering Mido Masia are expected back in the court for closing arguments. In 2013, Masia was dragged behind a police van and later died from his injuries in a holding cell. Then, in Polokwane, the trial of Amukelani Rikhotso, a truck driver who crashed into the vehicle of Public Services Minister Colin Chabane and his 2 bodyguards, killing them, is expected to continue as well today. Then in KwaZulu-Natal, community members in northern KwaZulu-Natal will be marching to their local court this morning to oppose the bail application of 3 men arrested at the weekend for the murder of Thandazile Msweli. Msweli's body was found in a shallow grave after she had been missing for 2 weeks. Time for us to take a break. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
SABC News seeks to be the biggest, the most extensive and diverse news organization on the continent. Our mission is to provide accurate and credible news and current affairs programming throughout the day. We are committed to covering every part of the continent. We reflect the world to Africa and Africa to the world. SABC News, Africa's news leader. Now available throughout the continent.
Welcome back. Olympic athlete Oscar Pistorius is expected to be released from prison this Friday in the middle of Women's Month and just 2 days after he would have been Reeva Steenkamp's 32nd birthday. That's tomorrow. But will society accept back their former role model? The state argued that Judge Thokozile Masipa incorrectly applied the legal principle of dolus eventualis in Pistorius' trial and that he should be convicted of murder. This is amongst the submissions in the state's heads of argument filed at the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein yesterday. While Oscar will have the spotlight on him this week, many prisoners are still in need of rehabilitation ahead of their release date now. Joining us today is Sean Victor. He's a representative for NICRO, an organisation that cares for the resettlement of offenders. A very good morning to you, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Just give us your reaction to the release of Oscar Pistorius this week.
I think it's important to understand that the legal system has taken its course, and in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act as well as the Correctional Services Act, he has complied and thus is allowed to be released on correctional supervision.
Now, you guys are experts in rehabilitation. We always see the horror stories of people repeat offending after they come out of prison. Are you happy with the kind of rehabilitation that we see in South African prisons? Or is it a fact that in South African prisons you go and do a master class in criminality?
I think it's important to remember that South Africa has one of the highest prison populations in the world and the highest in Africa. So trying to rehabilitate everyone who is incarcerated is obviously going to be a major challenge. I do, however, believe that rehabilitation is possible, but we also need to consider what is called the revolving door of prison, that once you have been incarcerated, your chances of being rearrested for another offence are greatly increased.
Now, we're talking about Oscar Pistorius as the case in point here. What programs and interventions would have been offered to him during this time of his incarceration?
It's very difficult to say on a specific case, but generally speaking, the Department of Correctional Services does render numerous programs and interventions for offenders. Things that he might have been subjected to would be anger management, for example, or the communication skills program and that kind of thing, but also because he is being released on correctional supervision, he would have been included in a program approximately 10 weeks before his release, preparing him for release on correctional supervision.
Now he's going to be under house arrest. Some of these programs, will they continue while he's under house arrest? And how does a house arrest, if you can tell us, how does it really work?
House arrest differs from case to case, depending on the ex-offender's situation. So, for example, some people might only be under house arrest for a couple of hours, whereas other people might actually be expected to be at home for a longer period of time. The purpose of a house arrest is so that the ex-offender can actually be monitored, but also there is a certain degree of flexibility so that reintegration back into society can actually occur. So this means that while under house arrest, the ex-offender is permitted, for example, to attend church services, to participate in sport, and then also one of the conditions of correctional supervision could be the attendance of rehabilitation programs as well as community service.
Now Oscar is expected to be released on Friday. How does that process, how does that work? Is it we open the gates and we let you go, or is there a whole lot of fanfare with, we suspect, of course, there'll be cameras and the world will be watching. How do you expect Oscar's release to proceed this week?
I think Oscar's case is pretty much unique. Usually I don't think that there is much fanfare about someone's release on correctional supervision, but because this is a high-profile case, as you mentioned, there will definitely be media present, and there will be those supporters of Oscar who will want to also be there for his release. However, generally speaking, what happens is that when an offender is released on correctional supervision, he or she would then report to the community corrections centre, where he or she would then be allocated a caseworker so that the person could be monitored.
And this house arrest, in conclusion, what are the terms? How can you break the terms of your house arrest? What are the things that you will not be allowed to do?
It all depends on the conditions that are set for the correctional supervision, but for example, some conditions include that you may not use alcohol and obviously not illegal substances. And for example, if you are found to have been consuming alcohol, that would be a breach of the correctional supervision. Also, if you're expected to be at home at a certain time and you are not, that would also be considered a breach of the conditions. Not attending the prescribed programs or not completing your community service would also be considered a breach of correctional supervision. So, depending on the conditions set, there are actually many ways that one could actually then be not adhering to the conditions that are set out. I think it's also very important to note that correctional supervision isn't really a walk in the park, because the conditions that are set are very strict. And should a person not comply with these conditions, they receive a warning, and after the third warning, they then are taken back to prison to complete their sentence within a correctional centre.
Well, Sean, very interesting. Thank you for joining us and giving us the inside information as to how this whole process with Oscar will now play out. That's Sean Victor. He's the representative for NICRA. Of course, they're an organisation that cares for the resettlement of offenders. Our pick of the day, you saw a little bit earlier, that horrific crash. 15 people were killed when that minibus taxi was struck by a train north of Durban yesterday afternoon. Here are some of your views on this matter. A lot of people, Luwazi talks about if the KZN taxi crash that killed 15 people, if no cause for industry scrutiny, then authorities have missed the trick. Yes, this taxi train crash in KZN, 14 dead, so tragic. Well, it's 15 dead now, I can tell you, Korani. And Paul says, 20 dead in 2 days. Plane crash and now taxi train crash. Heartbreaking. Yes, it is absolutely heartbreaking, and most concerning it is as well. Sam Klungu says, oh man, seen some images of the taxi train crash at Stanger. Very gory indeed. Yes, it was a scenario where there were talks. There was talk of mangled body parts in the middle of the wreckage. Really, really concerning. Now, research shows that on average, 3 women will die at the hands of their partners, their intimate partners here in South Africa. And, well, one particular case that brought the issue of gun ownership in South Africa under the spotlight was the case of Oscar Pistorius. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. He shot and killed his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, on Valentine's Day of 2013. Gun-free South Africa, Sonke Gender Justice, and the Women's Legal Centre have launched a campaign called Know the Law, Use the Law, Save a Life. And the message of this campaign is to raise awareness of how both the Domestic Violence Act and the Firearms Control Act have provisions that empower women to have guns and other dangerous weapons removed from their home if they are victims of domestic violence. Yesterday, the state submitted its written arguments for appeal against Oscar Pistorius' murder acquittal. Pistorius, of course, was found guilty of culpable homicide last year for shooting and killing his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp. He's scheduled to be released under correctional supervision on Friday. Now, from Sonke Gender Justice, we are joined by Mbuyiselo Botha this morning. Very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Morning. Thank you so much.
Firstly, before we talk about the campaign, I want to ask you, how do you view the release of, we've asked the question to our viewers, how do you view the release of Oscar Pistorius from prison into what is called correctional supervision in Women's Month?
Yeah.
It's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, but let me start off by saying, that we respect the rule of law. And you are aware, and you have just said it, that there is a process of appeal. But to say that it's a slap in the face for these campaigns and for women in general, because there are lots of women in our country who every day, every minute get killed, get sexually violated. They don't make it to the news. They don't make it to either television, radio, or newspapers. But we're saying that, unfortunately, this release sends a very disturbing message. And what is that message, if you ask me? People have said to us in the work we do, does it say that when you are rich, white, privileged, you have a certain set of rules? And this is what people have said. And then as a country, we would have to come back and say, and really look at these things. How do we treat those that are convicted of serious crimes, Eben?
Absolutely. Now, you've launched this campaign that deals with the issues around, one would think, domestic violence, the Domestic Violence Act. For me, the focus should really be on the kind of masculinity that we portray in South Africa. What I often see is violent masculinity. Tell us about the campaign and how do you view this?
Well, the campaign seeks to say that how do we then empower, because we know that it is women in the main who gets violated, who gets killed. I mean, Eben, can you believe that women die with protection orders, in their hands because police officers have not been able to, in fact, explain to them that you can demand that the gun be removed from your partner, your husband. So you find people, or even police officers, who would allow me as a perpetrator, served with the protection order, would allow me to go have time to pick up the gun. So we're saying that the law can only be as good as it's implemented, it's used correctly, properly. And this campaign says that simple, basic things that has to happen is that police understanding the Domestic Violence Act, the Firearms Control Act, that actually empowers them or the magistrate to demand that, and women to say that, I can say that Mbuyiselo I know has got a gun, legal or illegal. Well, obviously, we wouldn't know if it's illegal, I guess. And we know that women are killed by legal guns. They are killed by, not by strangers, even by people that purport to love them, to protect them.
Yeah, absolutely. The cases are too numerous to even mention here in South Africa. I want to ask you, what is the Oscar story? What does it tell us about gun violence, gun control, and masculinity in South Africa of today?
Look, it tells us that there's toxic form of masculinities. A colleague of mine, Tapiwa, has said this to me, that Bramboy, until and unless as a country we focus on how do we not only socialize men, but how do you also, at a deeper level, even, how do you talk and say to men, what does it mean to be a man? But also, how do we as a country go back and ask? And President Zuma did this, I think it was last week, with the spate of police killings, that most of us have not said a lot, and we should be outraged by this. But President Zuma had raised the question, how do we as a country probably reflect on the ownership of guns, the militarization of our country? Because the statistics that we're dealing with, the three organizations, have shown us that women are not killed by strangers. They are killed. So it is this toxic masculinity is what it means to be a man, but also the availability of guns. Security firms that are here, police, police, the army. And we know that, and there's evidence that women get killed because their partners have easy access to guns.
What's the lesson that we should learn from what has happened and from what is going to happen?
Tighten gun controls. So tighten them. And those that are found to be in possession and have used and abused them, ensure that the law takes its course. For example, we know that Oscar has had how many guns? If there was a proper way of regulating gun control in this country, we wouldn't be having this avalanche of guns where every Dick, Tom, Harry, or Salamina has access to a gun. Why?
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Very passionate this morning from Sonke Gender Justice. Mbuyiselo Botha, we're talking about, gun control in South Africa, gun violence, domestic violence, all within the context of Oscar Pistorius being released. The question we ask you today, what do you think of Oscar Pistorius' release from prison on correctional supervision, if I can add, in what is Women's Month in South Africa, a time of the year when we specifically look at all of these issues. Mbuyiselo Botha, thank you for joining us. Nice to talk to you today, to talk to you today about what is a passionate issue for all South Africans. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Well, let's move to our Facebook page and have a look what you can see. What you can see there. Of course, good news: motorists can expect another significant fuel price drop in September, with petrol prices expected to decrease between 55 cents and 64 cents a litre. Then, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, will tomorrow decide whether the Kenyan government blocked evidence in the case of Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. Kenyatta saw the 5 charges he faced of crimes against humanity dropped in December of 2014. Then a bomb blast at a popular shrine in Bangkok that had now killed 22 people, including 8 foreigners, did not match the tactics used by separatist rebels in southern Thailand. For more news updates, just go to Facebook. Put SABC Newsroom in the search bar. It's in the top left corner. We'll pop up, like our page, and you'll get all the latest updates all throughout the day as things develop. Time for us to take another break. You're with Newsroom here on SABC News.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Spumela Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines this morning. 5 people have reportedly been injured by rubber bullets outside the Rehabilitation Primary School west of Johannesburg this morning. Violence erupted when parents prevented a school bus from ferrying learners to a school near Pretoria Glen. This video is a video that's been tweeted by SABC reporter Jacques Steenkamp, who is at the scene.
Move!
The National Assembly will today debate the report of the ad hoc committee on Nkandla. During the debate, the Democratic Alliance in Parliament says it will move a motion on behalf of the opposition to have the committee's report substituted with the minority's report. And in KwaZulu-Natal, the cause of an accident which left 15 people dead in Shaka's Head near Bilito is being investigated. The province's Department of Transport and Police have launched a probe into the collision. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can, of course, also follow us and all of our journalists on Twitter. Search for @SABC Newsroom. Eben, back to you.
Thanks, Sydney. Now, with South Africa's gender wage gap being amongst the world's worst, how do we ensure women become a reasonable part of the economy? A panel of female researchers from the University of Johannesburg recently briefed the media on research findings and solutions that highlight women's stance within the economic and financial sectors of South Africa. To tell us more, we are joined today from the University of Johannesburg's Industrial Psychology and People Management Department, Professor Anita Bosch. Very good morning, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Evan.
Widest gender wage gap amongst the widest in the world. Isn't that a little bit embarrassing for a country like South Africa? And also why?
Yeah, even it really depends on what data sets you look at. You know, they always say you can torture statistics until they confess. But if you specifically look at the gender gap report that's brought out by the World Economic Forum, then women's earnings in South Africa are around about 52% of a man. So that would mean if a man earns 200 Rand, a woman would earn around about 104 Rand. And that's a substantial gap. Now, we've got to realize that this is an aggregated figure.
Yeah.
It doesn't indicate a particular industry and various factors that underpin this. The point is just that what we've done with a private salary survey is had a look at what the gap is for the formal economy, also at an aggregated level, and there we got to around about between 15 to 17%. So it still remains lower for women, depending on different data.
What does it say about all the campaigns we always see, the Women's Month, the Women's Days, all these kinds of things? Are we just paying lip service to equality in South Africa?
No, I think we're actually doing something about it. And by having these campaigns, we're raising the issues to societal level to be discussed. And I know that it also causes a lot of dis-ease with people when we talk about this. And very often by the end of August, people feel as though they really done, you know, they haven't had enough of it.
Yeah.
But I think it does raise the debates, the dinner table discussions, and we're able to actually work with some reliable research that we can start putting, you know, different things in place to change.
Let's look at the Employment Equity Act that was amended now at the end of 2014. It shows that a greater burden is going to be placed on organizations to ensure that men and women are representatively remunerated.
Yes.
Are you happy with that?
Yes.
And is it happening?
Well, yes, and we've got to remember that the Employment Equity Act not only covers women, but it also covers the races, disability, all of the other areas.
Yeah.
So this particular clause in the Act covers everybody. And so it would also be that if a man feels that he is not remunerated equally to what a woman is, he would be able to make a case. But what the amendment to Section 6 of the Act does is it gives greater teeth, really, to people to bring up these cases. Companies that are concerned, and there are very many of them, have really gone into widespread gender audits, and they've audited to see, where there are differences and where they might actually run into trouble.
Now, you at the university, you guys have had a look at it. What are the main reasons right now that there's still this wide gap?
I think most probably the most important one would play into the previous discussion you had on the show in terms of masculinity and femininity and how skills are viewed. So we still come from that era that a woman's type of skills are not economically highly valued and compared to, to a man's skill. And that plays into the workplace in various ways.
Well, heavy lifting should be the only different skill then, shouldn't it?
Yeah, well, even with that, we're finding that women that wish to go into, for instance, becoming a mechanic, there are instruments that you can use to help you with the heavy lifting.
There we go, yes.
So there's ways around doing these things, but more specifically, yes, a man has more bodily strength than a woman, but that should not dictate then how you're paid. Only if it is very specific to a job, that is when you differentiate.
Is there such a thing as a motherhood penalty or a fatherhood advantage within this paradigm?
Yes, and this has been well researched internationally. So what we find is if we control even for education and experience, and that's important, that there are women that have children earn less than women that do not have children, and men that have children earn more than a man that does not have children. So there's a bonus for men when they become fathers and a penalty to women when they become mothers.
Okay. In some instances, it's not really as simple as comparing a man's pay with that of a woman's. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely.
Why is this so complex?
Well, work can be split, and according to the Employment Equity Act, into the same work, similar work, or work of equal value. And in the third chapter of the Women's Report, Hugo Pinar actually writes this up beautifully from an employment law perspective. So the issue is whether a job is comparable, really, and what do you compare with? So if we look, for instance, at somebody working in a sector where they are doing sales and they know that their male colleague is getting a higher bonus for the sales, that would be discrimination, and so you'd need to take that up. But there's also these other two categories, and that's very difficult to determine based on differences in jobs.
You've got 30 seconds to tell us the solutions that were offered by the panel.
Well, of the first things is social reform, which is a long-term project.
That's the long game.
The long game. But in short, it's gender mainstreaming, looking at that very specifically, and companies following these acts and starting debates about this. I think it's about conversation and how to find societal solutions even in the workplace.
Well, I thank you for joining us. It's very concerning for me. I know I see a lot of statistics every day about, the wage gap and the gap between rich and poor. But this, in South Africa, with all the stuff that we do to try and equalize our country, to still have this massive gap, 104 Rand to 200 Rand is a lot.
Yes.
But thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. That's Professor Anita Bosch, who is from the University of Johannesburg's Industrial Psychology and People Management Department. And yes, we still have a major challenge when it comes to gender equality across the board in South Africa. So let's all work together to try and overcome that. Now, before we go, a bomb has exploded close to a shrine in the center of Thailand's capital, Bangkok. Now, the number is confirmed. Now, 22 people dead with more than 120 injured. Yeah, some of the tweets that have been coming in before we go. Kirsty says the Bangkok blast looks horrific. Thoughts and prayers to the 22 families affected and those surrounding. Yes, more than 120 injured as well. Harry talks about the world is very sick and no cure can be found or no doctors with guts. Bangkok blast. Shania says, my condolences and prayer with everybody affected by the recent explosion in Bangkok. Yes, the world is a very sick place. What do you think at SABC Newsroom? Tell us what you think about Oscar's release in Women's Month, by the way. That's the one we want you to send us. We're hoping to run some tweets around that one tomorrow. We're going to talk about Oscar's release the whole of the week. unfortunately. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time. And don't forget, you can watch the show back on demand on our YouTube channel anytime, anywhere, even in the office. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.
Most opposition parties, including the DA, have accused the government of ignoring the rule of law.
Nobody forced us to become a member.
And harming South Africa's moral standing. The EFF has accused the ICC of bias and says the court should find him in his own country.
It was naive for whoever took the government to court to think that it can be wise to arrest a head of state here in South Africa.
Had we taken the route otherwise, some of the members of this House would not be sitting where they are sitting right now.
For top stories and updates around the world, catch Your World weekdays at 9 p.m.
For the farmer, fire sometimes epitomizes a new beginning, purifying and cleansing the ravages of winter. With the help of the Children of Fire, Mita is now a social worker manager and helping other survivors to unleash their potential.
People should just allow people who are disabled or disfigured or whatever to be who they are.
Now happy and a bit more confident, Ntabi saying helps around at the Children of Fire with chores.
People must come with a full heart to give, not to do the selfie, ach shame, here's me and a burn kit.
Join me, Rifio Wemwilwa, on Bophelong every Saturday at 17:30.
Several thousand migrants are adrift in boats in Southeast Asian seas.
The refugees have been abandoned at sea by human smugglers with little food and water.
The UN has appealed to the governments of Thailand, Indonesia and Malaysia to act quickly to avert a massive humanitarian crisis.
Leaders will meet in Dar es Salaam on Wednesday to discuss the political crisis in Burundi.
At least 19 people have been killed and more than 200 wounded during violent protests against President Nkurunziza's bid for a third term.
Primetime News, daily at 6 p.m.
SABC News seeks to be the biggest, the most extensive and diverse news organization on the continent. Our mission is to provide accurate and credible news and current affairs programming throughout the day. We are committed to covering every part of the continent. We reflect the world to Africa and Africa to the world. SABC News, Africa's news leader. Now available throughout the continent